Antony Blinken, your successor, has said that the U.S. is planning things that we've not done in the past as it relates to Russia if they invade Ukraine. Do you think that this threat of invasion is for real, and what could those possibly be, things we've not done in the past?
Oh, Jay, thanks for letting me back on today. The threat is very real. The challenge is very serious. Vladimir Putin doesn't have any concerns that the Biden administration will do something that will impose real costs on him. So I think that makes the risk all that much greater to the West. I don't think he believes NATO is unified. I think he thinks the Eastern European countries and the Western ones have a different view of the risk. So yes, this threat is very real, and Vladimir Putin will use it in a way that aggrandizes himself, keeps himself in power, preserves his sphere of influence. I'm glad to see Secretary Blinken is going there to support the Ukrainian people. That's the right approach. We should send increased armaments, weapon systems. We should make clear that violating Ukrainian sovereignty is unacceptable. That's something we will not stand for. And when he says we'll do things we've not done before, I don't know what he's speaking about, but it's possible that there are sanctions beyond even those that were put in place in the Trump administration that they would be prepared to do, including potentially disconnecting Russia from what's called SWIFT. It's really the global economic system, the global cash transfer payment system. This would be a significant sanction, and I think Vladimir Putin would have to think twice about taking action if he believed that the Biden administration had credibility with respect to that. I hope Secretary Blinken can convey the seriousness with which they're taking this.
Yes, Secretary Pompeo, on that front, let me ask this. On that front, just dealing with the ability of basically disconnecting Russia from the greater economic systems, do you think my concern here is what Europe will tolerate? Would Europe tolerate that kind of action, especially the Germans?
Well, Jay, first instance, the United States can largely effectuate this on its own. It would need some assistance, but we did it with respect to the Iranians during our administration. The Europeans tried their darndest to get around that, creating something called Instex. It just never worked because of American economic power. So I think the United States could actually execute this in a way that would effectuate that objective, whether the Europeans agree or not. Second, the reason that I think if the Europeans fight it isn't because we couldn't do it, but because the Biden administration won't. We saw this with Nord Stream 2. Germany said, hey, we need this. This is a good deal. Our former chancellor runs a good chunk of this, is going to make a ton of money off of this. We need to move forward with this pipeline, and the United States acquiesced to Russia and to Germany. It might well happen again here.
So in addition to being Secretary of State, of course, you were the director of the CIA. Under President Obama, the CIA acting CIA director was Michael Morrell. He was one of them. He said this about America's credibility. He said, if we back down from our support or if Russia invades, we lose credibility. The tragedy that unfolded with our Afghanistan withdrawal already severely damaged the U.S. credibility under the Biden administration. Did that embolden President Putin to make the Ukraine push? In other words, did our exit from Afghanistan and the way we did it impact, because it seems like the moves on Ukraine have happened since then?
Jay, I think it's undoubted that world leaders across the globe, friends, those who are trying to figure out whether they want to be friends, and our adversaries all watched the way in which President Biden evacuated Afghanistan, the tragedy, 13 Americans killed, lots of Americans left behind without a plan, frankly, without consulting our allies in a sufficient way. I think they all saw that, and it's caused them to be emboldened. Weakness often begets risk for the United States of America. So when I hear Mike Morrell, who I know and who did good work at the CIA for many years, when I hear him say that, someone who was deeply part of the Democrat establishment, it's really quite something. I think it suggests this isn't partisan. This isn't political. This is about keeping Americans from my home state of Kansas and California and New York, all across the country, safe from the threats that are presented to us by what's happening. To preserve the American way of life means we need to keep the American traditions, and that includes defending our friends when they're in trouble.
Colonel Smith?
Yeah, the second and third order effects of all this going on, I think are alarming. The UAE was attacked by the Houthi rebels with this drone attack, over the weekend. I'm wondering, it seems like we have backed away not only from our allies in other places, but in the Middle East. We paused sales to the UAE for their airplanes, and we've quit giving, Saudi Arabia some of the defensive missile systems. And I think the Houthi rebels are emboldened. Of course, they're a proxy of Iran. What do you see as the connection between this perception that we are weak in places like dealing with Putin, and how it impacts China, Taiwan, the Middle East, and all the other countries?
You went around the world pretty nicely there. You just missed Chairman Kim firing missiles into the ocean. The list of emboldened leaders is pretty long. These authoritarian regimes understand one thing. They understand power, not military power exclusively, diplomatic power, economic power, all the things one does when they build alliances. When they see weakness, you'll see them move. What the Iranians did, and I talk about it being the Iranians, not the Houthis. The Houthis are a bunch of tribesmen, right? These are Iranian missiles filed from Yemen by the Iranians themselves into Abu Dhabi. When you see that, they recognize that the United States' response is to go to Vienna and try and cut a deal to try and appease the Iranians. That portends bad things in each of these places, whether it's with China and Xi Jinping or Chairman Kim in North Korea or Vladimir Putin in Russia. They will all see that if you threaten and coerce, you can make moves, and the United States won't do the simple things to preserve America and defend our security here at home.
I want to go back to the situation with Russia and Ukraine. You wrote in a piece that's posted at ACLJ.org called Priorities for a Strong, Secure America in 2022. And this is what you wrote. Reports from just this past month indicated that Team Biden suggested that Ukraine cede its authority over the Donbass region, making it an autonomous zone rather than territory under the control of the Ukrainian government in order to cool tensions with Russia. Where does that end up leading?
We know how this ends in Europe,
yeah.
Right? Step at a time. We all know precisely how this moves forward, especially today when the threats are now both physical and kinetic, but also cyber and political and economic. We know precisely how this control will continue to be exerted. I hearken back to when Vladimir Putin engaged in activity that we didn't like and we pushed back. We immediately saw that he met steel. He saw that he met steel, and we had very different conversations after that. This is how diplomacy and power are used around the world. I hope this administration figures out how to do this.
You know, I quoted this earlier, but Benjamin Disraeli famously said that, diplomacy as war. I mean, he wrote an entire chapter of a book on diplomacy as an act of war, in saying you could use diplomacy for impact as if it was war. I mean, because of the nature of that type of diplomacy. My question here is, you've sat down with these people. You know Vladimir Putin. You know the foreign minister of Russia. You know President Zelensky. If you were in charge of the government in the United States, what would be the next move?
Jay, I like to think we wouldn't have gotten here.
Yes.
But given that we're here, the next move would be precisely what you just saw. You'd send your Secretary of State to Ukraine, but you wouldn't send them there unarmed. And I don't mean militarily. Right. You would send him there with a toolkit where he could credibly speak to the Ukrainian people. He could credibly speak to the Ukrainian government. He could speak to the Poles and the Estonians and the Lithuanians, all of whom see themselves as the next meal on the table for Vladimir Putin if NATO and the United States don't step forward and provide the security. Those are the things one would do. It's not about sending tens of thousands of soldiers. Our administration didn't behave that way. And yet we were able to push back against these very regimes that this administration is struggling to secure our freedom against.
Last question. For the people that are watching, like you said, in Kansas, in North Carolina, in California, wherever they might be, the risk factor here if this is not handled correctly?
The risk factor is that over some period of time, we will lose our capacity to be that defender of freedom. And when we lose that, the risk is that we lose our freedoms here at home as well. They're not a one-to-one. It's not perfect agency, but they're deeply connected. And for America to abandon an ally, our friends, the Australians, the Japanese, the South Koreans, the Europeans, our friends in the Gulf, the Saudis, the Emiratis, they will see this and they will begin to cut deals with authoritarian regimes that leave the United States and its economy out of the quintessential places that we need to be today. I saw the Saudis today talking to the Chinese on energy in a way that they wouldn't have had to do in the Trump administration.
Yeah, I saw that. And is exactly what you said is right, Mike. That is, the repercussions of this weakness will have impact in the rest of not just the region in Europe, but the rest of the world. Mike Pompeo, Senior Global Counsel for Global Affairs, former Secretary of State, former Director of the CIA. Tremendous that we have you as part of this team. Thank you, Mike. We appreciate it.